Hello everybody, Ravenite here. Year 9 of For Honor is just around the corner. And for a while now, I've been getting messages from people who are new to For Honor, or they're returning from a long time away, and they've all been asking me the same thing. What's been going on? What have we missed? We feel like so much stuff has happened and we have no idea what's going on. Could you please do a video recapping the lore and history of For Honor? Well, I did want to make this video. This is something that I'd really like to do, but I wanted to wait until the year had come to a close before I did it, because I wanted to make sure that I could cover all of Year 8 as well. And so, now that we're finally wrapping up Year 8 and getting ready to go into Year 9, I feel the time is finally upon us to talk about the full history of For Honor. So that's what this video aims to do. I'm going to break down the entire history of For Honor, all the way from the Cataclysm to the end of Year 8, which we're just now wrapping up. Now, to be clear, what I plan to do here is I'm going to start with the Cataclysm and then talk about each year of For Honor, breaking down each season and what we got from it, mostly involving the heroes and the conflicts that went on in those seasons and how they all tie into each other. This isn't going to go into super deep detail here. If you want super deep details, we can do individual videos on each season if you like, but for now, this is just an overall recap of the history of For Honor. All right, so let's get started. And I think, as with all things, it's important that we go back to the beginning. Way back. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty and... Oh! Sorry, you probably don't want to go quite this far back, do you? Okay. I'll jump ahead a little. From what we understand, the world of For Honor functions similar to ours up until around the year 1000 AD. At this time, a great global catastrophe hit the world, known as the Cataclysm. This event changed the world entirely, moving continents, seas, and land masses about. Few survived, and those that did were left with fewer resources than they could manage. A fight for survival began. In the continent known as Heathmore, 3 factions in particular gathered: the Vikings of the North, the Knights of the West, and the Samurai, foreign warriors from an island nation who traveled to land in the eastern part of Heathmore. These 3 factions began a long and brutal war for land, resources, and control. Neither side would give up or relent, and over 1,000 years of war would see these nations advance, grow, and in the end, forget even their own reason for fighting in the first place.
All I want is for you to admit what you are. My wolves.
However, as with all things, the factions grew weary of war, and slowly whispers of peace began to grow. This sparked the ire of a particular warlord, Apollyon. For a full breakdown of Apollon's ideology and character, go to my Who is Apollyon video. What you need to know is that Apollyon believed firmly that war was mankind's natural state of being, that peace leads to complacency and weakness. Unwilling to accept this new world order of peace, she decided to rekindle the faction war through the use of her Blackstone Legion. Instigating conflicts between the Vikings, Samurai, and Knights, Apollyon would cause catastrophic damage to all 3 factions, to the point that all 3, in their desperation, would come to her fortress for revenge. Apollyon died at the hands of the Emperor's champion of the Samurai, but she had fulfilled her goal all the same. With their common enemy destroyed, the 3 factions turned their hate and fury on each other, and thus the wars began anew. For full detail on how Apollyon went about this task, I encourage you to play the campaign mode of For Honor. But now, let's move beyond the campaign and get into what came after Apollyon. We can consider the story of Apollyon and the campaign the first season of Year 1, so we move on to Season 2.
Some fight for warlords. They fought for an empire.
Theirs was a secret society. Even we samurai were not sure they actually existed.
In Season 2 of Year 1, Shadow and Might, the factions are now embroiled in their new war that Apollyon has plunged them into. Thanks to her influence, the factions are calling upon their secret backup warriors. The Samurai unleash the Shinobi, their shadow warriors and assassins. Meanwhile, the Knights reconnect with their ancient roots as the Centurions make their return, commanders from an empire long thought lost from whom the Knights were founded. With the Knights now with new commanders, their military strength was made even more ferocious, but the presence of the Shinobi had altered the very nature of the battlefield for all the factions, and thus new tactics were implemented as a result.
Ancient alliances kept their lands safe, but their oaths have come due.
The roar of the crowd can be intoxicating. It can give you the edge you need to defeat an opponent. It can also seal your fate, should you lose favor.
In the following season, Grudge and Glory, the Knights continued to dip into their ancient roots and began recruiting gladiators, fighters from the ancient empire who had spent much of their lives fighting for sport and glory, but never on a battlefield. Even so, the Knights' needs came first, and what greater glory could they find than an all-out war? The Vikings, meanwhile, called on an old and very disgruntled ally, the Highlanders, harsh and hardy warrior people whose ancient oaths and alliances have kept their land safe, were now required to answer the call to war to aid the Vikings in their time of need. Once again, the war's very nature had altered.
Some must fall from grace. But when samurai fall, they also free themselves from their masters.
Do you hear them? They are always whispering, just out of reach. But when the red spills, she can hear them louder.
In Season 4 of Year 1, Order and Havoc, the samurai and the Vikings are forced to call upon their most uncooperative allies. The samurai were forced to call upon the strength of the Aramusha, wandering warriors without masters who seek their own destiny, and now join the war largely to fulfill personal goals rather than to defend their homeland. Meanwhile, the Vikings turned to the feral and ferocious shamans, wild mystics and seers who fight like wild animals and prey upon their enemies like beasts. It was a sign of desperation for all three factions, and it was clear that Apollyon's initial goal was being achieved. The wolves were rising in every group, and this war was nowhere near slowing down. Year 2 doesn't start off with much in terms of change to the lore. Age of Wolves was largely an anniversary season with a focus on gameplay updates, stability improvements, and overall changes. Lore would not start becoming a focus until next season.
Since the dawn of our memories, great heroes walked these forests and drank from these rivers. They were not gods. They were flesh and bone. But their most honorable battles were almost divine.
In Season 2, Heroes March, the factions are deeply embroiled in their war, but quite often in war we hear tales of heroes and great champions. So in this season, there was a heavy focus on legendary heroes of each faction, and their exploits and strength being praised and recognized. Overall, though, this was seen as a relatively dry period in terms of the war. But next season would change that. In this season, things are changing. Volcanoes are erupting. Storms are raging furiously. Fear begins to spread amongst the factions of another cataclysm on the way, and that fear leads to paranoid laying blame. As each faction tries to blame the other for these great disasters befalling them, the war heats up intensely and more blood is shed amidst the chaos. However, with the chaos raging, Heathmore would be blindsided by another unforeseen event. The arrival of an invading army. Marching Fire saw the arrival of the Wulin, Chinese warriors traveling from their own destroyed empire to make a claim on the lands of Heathmore. With the factions locked at each other's throats, none were prepared for the fast, brutal, and even effective tactics of the Wulin, led by their self-proclaimed emperor Gao Lei. The fighting between the three factions suddenly redirected in an attempt to push back the Wulin forces. What resulted was a complete stalemate. While the Wulin couldn't push any further into Heathmore, the factions were also unable to fully expel them from the nation. From this, the Wulin were able to create a solid foothold in Heathmore, and thus these new foreigners were here to stay.
time to repent is over! I will take up arms again! Step out of the shadows and teach them true darkness!
Year 3 would pick up right after the Wulin's invasion. The factions were now reeling. Natural disasters were plaguing the land. Volcanoes and earthquakes were causing enormous damage. Storms were tearing towns and cities apart. And now a new enemy, the Wulin, had arrived. All signs were pointing to another cataclysm, and this terrified all the factions. It was time to stop playing around. Resources were scarce enough. If another cataclysm hit, they wouldn't survive if this war was continuing. No longer could the factions indulge in ordinary conventional war. It was time to draw on their darker weapons, their more undesirable secrets. In Season 1 of this year, the Samurai and the Vikings decided to forge an alliance to attack the Knights of Yttervatnen. The Knights, in their desperation, called upon the Black Priors, led by Vortigern. Once they were noble and devout warriors who fought for a higher calling, but they had sworn loyalty to Apollyon during her reign, and after her downfall were shamed and slunk into the shadows, seeking new purpose and direction. But now, with the future of the Knights at stake, and to face off against the Samurai and Viking alliance that was attacking, the Black Priors emerge once more from the darkness to butcher, slaughter, and maim. They will repent no longer. They will earn their retribution by spilling the blood of every foe they come across.
I offer you peace and salvation. Be not afraid. Your soul is now mine.
With Vortigern and the Black Priors having devastated the Viking and Samurai alliance at the harbor, the Vikings now decided it was time to start taking what they could from the Samurai. After all, this was a survival of the fittest situation, and they were now quite desperate. In their own desperation, the Samurai reluctantly lured the Vikings into a map known as the Canopy, where the Samurai's own dark warriors waited. The Hitokiri, and their most infamous manslayer, Sakura. The Hitokiri are bloodthirsty and savage executioners of the Samurai, who view all life as pain and agony, believing it to be a mercy that they put to death those suffering from it. Legend has it they collect the souls of the dead and wear them upon their clothing. The Vikings were no match for the Hitokiri, and in their panic were forced to retreat, with the Knights in hot pursuit, while the Samurai stayed behind, attempting to reconsolidate and rebuild.
Jormungandr! Bring your wrath, Ragnarök comes!
With the Knights still after them, the Vikings fled to Stor's stronghold, where they were at last forced to seek help from their own outcast warriors, the Jormungandr. Viking citizens born with strange skin deformities and odd attributes or illnesses were sent to Stor, where these outcasts formed the cult of the Jormungandr, believing the great world serpent to be their god and father. As the knights landed on the shores, the Jormungandr launched a counterattack, devastating the Knight legions and forcing a complete and total retreat. Legends say that the serpent itself arrived to help defend Stor's stronghold, though this can't be confirmed. The Vikings had saved themselves the wrath of the Knights, but they had now opened the gateway for the Jormungandr to finally be unleashed upon Heathmoor.
In the midst of war, I breathe fire.
While all of this carried on, the Wulin were plotting their own goals in secret. Constructing their new fortress Chang Pass, Gao Lei had tasked his own secret warriors, the Zhan Hu, and their leader Sunda, his trusted alchemist and advisor, to help craft new secret weapons for the Wulin. However, due to an accidental explosion which crippled the defense of Chang Pass, the Wulin found themselves at the mercy of a strange warrior group. Knights, but not from any current legion. Rather, they were the remnants of the old Blackstone Legion, led by a mysterious commander. The Wulin tried to evacuate their emperor Gao Lei, but it was no use. He was captured and exiled. And the Wulin, left leaderless, were scattered and broken. Meanwhile, Sunda was recruited by these Blackstone Legion remnants for purposes unknown.
For a brief moment, the leaders of Heathmoor ceased their quarrel. It was called the Truce of Wyverndale.
In time, the disasters stopped. The conflicts lessened. The skies cleared. And with the cataclysm fear finally dying away, the factions began to put down their weapons, at last tired of this fighting. The leaders of each faction gathered together at an ancient city called Wyverndale and discussed a truce. The Truce of Wyverndale. A time for peace and the chance to come together as brothers in arms rather than rivals and enemies. It was time for hope to return to Heathmoor, with games to celebrate their unity and to honor the dead. This truce would bring a sort of end to the traditional faction war. But it would not bring an end to war altogether. Someone else would see to that.
Peace is poison. We are war.
During the festivities of the Truce of Wyverndale, there was a surprise attack. Using an unknown and toxic corrupting stone called Draconite, a new and deadly unknown army descended upon the people of Wyverndale and the faction leaders. This mysterious army, calling itself the Order of Horkos, was commanded by a woman in armor resembling that of the once feared Apollyon. This was Astria, the she-wolf of Horkos, and with her, she brought the warmonger knights who swear loyalty to Horkos and Astria alone, and not to Ashfeld. Astria, inspired by Apollyon, claimed to have been given a sign by the god of truth, Horkos, who told her to carry on Apollyon's legacy. This piece of Wyverndale was a lie and a sham, and she would prove it. She would shepherd the wolves of this world and restore it to its proper place, where the strong thrive and rule the weak. The weaklings are subjugated by their superiors. Joining her were not only the warmongers, but also the very harbinger warriors that the factions had run to last year, the Black Priors, the Hitokiri, the Jormungandr, and the Janhu. It turned out that these four warrior groups believed that if peace truly came, they would no longer have any use and would be forced to return to seclusion. And they wouldn't accept this. Horkos had gained the most devastating warriors possible, and with them were now prepared to plunge the world into a tyrannical regime run by the Order of Horkos.
Because it only takes a spark to start a rebellion.
Not all were content to sit and watch as Astria took over Heathmoor. Small pockets of resistance fighters rose up to try and break the hold of Horkos, and to do this they chose to attack her and her Draconite mines and supply locations. Rescuing and recruiting a blacksmith named Ilma, they had her craft weapons to counter the Draconite in the hopes of finding some weakness or potential counter to the Order of Horkos. However, these resistance groups were mere annoyances to Astria, only taking back a few strongholds, nothing significant. Until they were unified, they were safely ignored and forgotten.
So, listen to me, warriors. Don't let some mad tyrants play God with your lives. Fight for the people who saw the good in you. Fight for those who will want to remember you.
With the help of Draconite weaponry and the reclamation of a few fortresses, the resistance groups were finally starting to gain ground. But it was meaningless in the end if they couldn't unite against Horkos. Then there came a man. His name was Holden Cross. Once he was the right-hand man of Apollyon herself and one of the leaders of the Blackstone Legion. But after realizing his mistake in working with Apollyon, he left Heathmoor and traveled as a mercenary and wanderer, learning the ways of the world, studying and realizing the truth that strength comes from embracing differences and new ideas. He has returned as Griffin and is unifying the resistance groups to become one army, Chimera. With an actual army now, Horkos had something to worry about, and with an actual seasoned veteran commanding them, Astria now had a rival. Under the shade of an eclipse, a great battle would be waged to decide the fate of Heathmore. After the Battle of the Eclipse, there was no decisive winner between Horkos and Chimera. As a result, the war between these two groups would go on for years. In that time, covenants would form that pledged their loyalties to either Chimera or Horkos, thus creating new alliances, enemies, and opportunities. To capitalize on this, Horkos and Chimera both held festivals and ceremonies to welcome these new covenants to their fold. Horkos held the Horkos Masquerade, a series of battles and competitions to weed out the weak and leave only the strong. Meanwhile, Chimera held the Banquet of Chimera, where warriors interacted in a series of games, matches, and competitions to encourage unity and camaraderie. It was in this time the two forces were truly consolidating their power.
They came from nowhere. They left us in awe.
Unfortunately, the growth of these two forces had consequences on not just the people of Heathmore, but also the spiritual and physical worlds. Balance had been disrupted, and a drought spread all throughout the land as a result. The drought dried up the sea, taking water and food, and thus the two factions were both given their first real test. In the face of drought, how will they maintain the trust and support of their covenants? To this end, Horkos and Chimera began searching for new sources of water, and meanwhile, an ancient order within the samurai known as the Kyoshin, who had sworn to adhere to and maintain the balance within the world, have emerged to try and set things right in the spiritual and physical world.
What some see as a disaster, we grasp as an opportunity. The gods have sent us a challenge. Will you rise up and accept?
While Horkos and Chimera struggled with each other, and the Kyoshin began their work to correct the spiritual imbalances, the Vikings turned to their own solution: sacrifice. By offering many human sacrifices and praying to the gods for salvation, their prayers were finally answered, in the form of a mighty, destructive tempest, flooding the lands and plaguing Heathmore with a long, terrible maelstrom. But rather than despair, the Vikings saw this as their chance to answer the call of the gods and prove their worth once more. This was not a disaster, but a test once more to prove their valor and their merit.
The elements took their toll on us. But we are still here.
When the maelstrom finally subsided, Heathmore was now forced to pause the fighting briefly, as the flooded land was now near inhospitable and a severe winter set in, freezing the frozen shores and lands around them. Chimera and Horkos had no choice but to cease hostilities for a period and recover. But that didn't mean everyone was idle. People began reconnecting. Families and friends reunited, celebrating what they had left and counting their many blessings. However, as this went on, ships began to appear on the frozen shores. Ships from an unknown group, the Pirates, led by Bo Yin. They were not interested in a faction war or Chimera or Horkos' feud. Though both Chimera and Horkos tried to recruit them, Bo Yin and her pirates only had one goal in mind: treasure. As it turns out, Heathmore had quite a few secret treasures, long forgotten, and Bo Yin was more than happy to take them for herself.
Long before the cataclysm, before Heathmore ever bore its name, a brave warden vowed to bring peace to his people. By doing the unthinkable, he ventured out where no one had ever dared. In a forest lay a beast no one could tame. But the warden's will did not waver, sealing a blood pact to end all wars.
Now, with the first new season of Year 6, the lore of the main narrative takes a pause as we are told a legendary tale of the first warden, Ramiel. Once upon a time, in Heathmoor's ancient past before the Cataclysm, there lived a knight who dreamed of freeing his people from oppression. To do this, he made a deal with the wyverns and drank their blood from a cup called the Chalice of Immortality. This gave him eternal life and the aid of the great beasts, and with their help he freed his people and founded Wyverndale. But after centuries of guarding his people, a great calamity came, which many believed to be the Cataclysm itself, and Ramiel rallied his forces to defend Heathmoor once again, and though successful in the end, he was defeated and killed, and the wyverns were never seen again.
In a far corner of the world, legends speak of a bracelet passed down from one pharaoh to the next. It was said the bracelet could restore life, erased from history, faded from memory. Now, I have found it. With the bracelet, I bring glory to Valkenheim once more.
In the aftermath of this cataclysm, the Vikings were suffering tremendously. One Jarl, Bolthorn, set out across the lands to find something that could save his people. In the lands of Egypt, he discovered a sacred relic, the Scarab Bracelet. Wearing it gave one power over life and death. Stealing this treasure, he returned to Valkenheim and began using it to save his people and bring prosperity once more to the Vikings. But with the misuse of the artifact came a terrible series of plagues. People began dying. Frogs rained from the sky and rivers turned to blood. Bolthorn had cursed these lands and had been cursed in turn. To relieve Heathmoor of this, the guardians of Egypt and the keepers of the Scarab Bracelet, the Magi, arrived in Heathmoor to reclaim their treasure and correct Bolthorn's sins. This is how the Magi came to be in Heathmoor, and now they remain to attempt to lead the people down a new path of their own making.
Something has awakened in the mire. Glowing eyes watch in the night. Shadows slither through the woods, and twisted cackles taunt us. Brave samurai venture into the swamps. But what comes back? It isn't them. A deadly web has been woven and there is no escape. My teachings were wrong. Only fools don't fear the dark.
Meanwhile, deep in the mire, there is a legend of a mother of yokai, the Jorogumo. Said to have been sealed away for centuries, a fissure in the seal thanks to the cataclysm has broken it, and now yokai pour across the lands. The samurai gradually begin to fall to the evil forces, and only one weapon in existence has the power to save them. The Mamono Dagger, a sacred demon-slaying weapon that has the power to kill yokai, but seal their souls within the user. A heavy price, but one that Maiko is willing to pay when her brother is taken by the Jorogumo. She finds and uses the dagger to kill countless yokai and take their souls onto her person. Finally, she slayed the Jorogumo where it lived, but with all the yokai spirits within her trying to take her over, including the Jorogumo herself, she knew there was only one path for her. She sealed herself away forever so that the yokai would never again escape and cause harm to the world. The Chalice of Immortality, the Scarab Bracelet, and the Mamono Dagger. 3 of the 4 sacred relics. But there is still one more. One more that has yet to find its way to the lands of Heathmoor, until we return to the current narrative.
Fate is the one true enemy. A warrior that can't be fought or predicted. Yet in the libraries of Arabia, there is a sphere that tells the histories of tomorrow. hidden by a wise and beloved Sultana. Now, it is mine.
In Season 4, we finally return to the main narrative of the story. Horkos has been on the back foot as of late, and they need a new trump card. Legends tell of a land far away called Arabia, where a wise sultana keeps a sacred treasure known as the Celestial Sphere, which allows one to see into the future. Interested in getting this treasure for herself, Astria sends one of her most trusted and most ruthless weapons, Commander Ravier. Ravier arrives in Arabia at first with talks of peace, trade, and diplomacy, and after earning the trust of the Sultana, she's allowed to see the sphere. Ravier looks into the sphere and sees a future for Horkos and Heathmore. A future she must share with Astria, but never allow anyone else to know about. To ensure the secret stays with her, Ravier smashed the Celestial Sphere to pieces, killed the Sultana, and fled back to Heathmore with her retinue to tell Astria what she'd learned. But this blatant evil sparked the rage of the Guardians of Arabia, the Aphira, who followed Ravier back to Heathmore to exact their vengeance. With no home left to fight for, the Aphira remained to right the destiny of Heathmore with their own hands and to rebuild their sacred relic.
I joined the Inquisition with a righteous heart, hoping to stop the fanatics and their twisted faith. Our mission was to purge the heresy. But I was misled. Only the guilty were meant to die. Only those old enough to reach the noose should ever swing from it. This war of faith is madness. A plague on Heathmore. I will carve out the rot.
Unfortunately, because of the information given to Astria from the Celestial Sphere, Horkos was able to prepare for and counter Chimera at every turn, forcing Chimera almost completely into obscurity, unable to respond as Horkos began solidifying their power by establishing an Inquisition, intending to root out threats to Horkos' order and control. Good thing too, as about this time a cult was rising in Ashfeld called the Order of the Stake. These cultists worshipped the 4 ancient relics mentioned in the previous year's events, and were trying to gather them and use them to bring glory to themselves and Heathmore. This led to a feud and war between the Inquisition and the cult, which cost countless innocent lives in Ashfeld. To put an end to it all, an Inquisitor pirate named Yin Chen stole away the relics and escaped out to sea with them to put an end to the fight for them once and for all. Without their relics to rally to, the cult was eventually overcome by the Inquisition, and the war was ended.
So falls decency. A prize for all to see. Eagle hearts take flight. Blood runs at first light.
Unfortunately, this fight with the cult was costly, and Astria was running low on finances to continue her conquest of Heathmore. Rumors abounded of a city of gold across the sea, so she sent her trusted warmonger, Conquistador Vela, to lead an expedition to the city to find what was there. Vela was successful and brought back mountains of gold and treasures, as well as a prisoner from those lands, with the hope of impressing Astria with her gains. But in the end, it was a clever trap. Following the ships back to Heathmore, the vengeful Ocelots attacked in force, killing the members of Horkos' banquet and sending Vela into hiding. Now the Ocelot are determined to get their revenge on Horkos and stop invaders from Heathmore to ever return to their homeland. Astria, meanwhile, took the gold she could and began to put it towards her next venture.
Welcome, honored guests. Come pay tribute to the spirits of your ancestors. You know well the rules. Stay indoors at night. Fight not near water. Avoid wandering shadows. But above all, never eat the offerings.
Now, about this time, while all this was going on, the Wu Lin were trying to gather and reconsolidate. They hadn't had any real relevance or power since their defeat at Chang Pass, but now they had received a very generous donation from Horkos to hold a time-honored tradition, the Hungry Ghost Festival, a time to honor the dead and spirits of the world. And they were to invite the leaders from all the other factions. All the factions, worn out from the arrival of the Aphira and the Ocelot, as well as the battle between the cult and the Inquisition, were more than willing to partake in a happy festival like this. But it was, in fact, another trap. The Wu Lin knew that the foreigners would not understand or follow the rules of the festival and would anger the spirits, and they hoped the spirits would lash back at the ignorant knights, samurai, and Vikings. And it worked, but too well. The festivities summoned the powerful white-boned spirit, Bai Gujing. She trapped the partygoers to play a deadly dance of death with them in her theater of bones. All of Heathmoor's leaders may have died then and there at her hands, had it not been for the timely arrival of the legendary Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, Bai Gujing's old enemy, who defeated her and freed the people of Heathmoor. The Wu Lin, who were blamed for this atrocity, were again forced to flee and go into hiding, divided and shattered once again.
The enemy came in the night. They offered a choice. Submit or die. Death. No oath is worth such fealty. We did what we had to. Some will look down on us, brand us traitors. Let them do so at the end of our blades.
Astria, still unbothered by the losses with the Wu Lin, had turned her attention towards Valkenheim to try and secure her control of the northern realms. One land still eluded her, the village of Moldor. They were allied with Chimera and would resist if attacked. However, the village was clearly no match for the full might of Horkos' warriors, and Chimera would be unable to reach them in time to reinforce their position. Fighting back surely meant death, but Horkos offered them mercy if they surrendered and joined up. The village Jarl refused outright, unwilling to break his oath. But his sworn brother Maddox the Highlander vehemently disagreed. He was a survivor, and throwing your life away meaninglessly over some oath was not something he would ever agree to. When the time came, Maddox killed his sworn brother, betraying his village, his friend, and his Jarl. And his like-minded Vikings slaughtered those who didn't join and swore his loyalty to Horkos then and there. However, he didn't kill all of the Jarl's people. The daughter of the Jarl, Katla, managed to escape and link up with Griffin. At the suggestion of Griffin, she traveled northward to seek the mercenary band known as the Varangian Guard. They were honor-bound to uphold their oaths, and with Katla as their newest member, they attacked Maddox in his new holdings and defeated his forces quickly, forcing Maddox to flee as fast as he could to the shelter of Horkos. But now the Varangians are here to stay in Heathmoor, for their oath has not yet been fulfilled.
Before the doom, when knights stood mighty and proud, there passed a sword of legend, only to the most gallant. It was meant to protect, to unite. But after the cataclysm, all was lost. In the chaos, the sword fell to me, a lone warden. I would wield it true, to aid those in need. As for the rest, the desperate few, those who would pillage and despoil, I would fight.
Once again, at the beginning of Year 8, the narrative takes a break to go into the history of Heathmoor, telling the story of various legendary weapons and heroes in its past. In this season, we go back to just after the Cataclysm, when the Knight, Samurai, and Viking first clashed. The story tells of the Sword of Ashfeld, a legendary weapon passed from Chosen Warden to Chosen Warden. Back then, when the knights were at their lowest, the unsung knight, wielding this legendary sword, appeared and led Ashfeld in forcing back the invading Vikings and samurai, reminding all the knights what it was they fought for and stood for. This legend has been passed down for years among the knights as a constant reminder of knight valor and knight duty.
Our enemies are legion. They strike at us by the swarms, but 1,000 blades cannot match mine.
Within the mire, there is a legendary swordsman known as Master Katashi, a wandering Orochi who mastered the way of Zen and through his mastery was able to tame and control the cursed Muramasa sword, a blade filled with the hate and vengeance of hundreds. Using its power as his own, he spent his life guarding a special bridge leading into the mire to protect the people. However, one day he met a new challenger, a samurai carrying 7 weapons named Oniwaka, a Sohei. The two dueled for hours until the battle finally ended in a draw. Oniwaka, who spent his life collecting the weapons of his defeated foes, found himself humbled by the skill of Katashi, and the two decided to become allies, working to train a new generation of Sohei in their way of war. Now the two work to defend the mire from all threats, both foreign and domestic, and with the combined strength of the Muramasa blade and the Sohei, they are unstoppable.
Warriors rise and fall every day. Most of us shall be forgotten, but there are some who shall live forever. Glory to our protector, Gudmundr the Great, wielder of Odin's gift. Sword and shield of legend, pride of the Vikings. Rejoice, my fallen brother. To Valhalla you go.
Back when Apollyon invaded Valkenheim, the Blackstone Legion had invaded and burned the city of Svengard, one of the most crucial and important cities to the Vikings, as it housed their crop and grain storage for the winters. Guarding that city was the legendary Gudmundr, the great Jarl who it is said once entered Helheim itself and, aided by 3 young wolf pups, found the blessed weapons of Odin. When Gudmundr was killed by the Lord Warden, all of Valkenheim put aside their differences to mourn his death. According to Viking tradition, the weapon of the Jarl must be broken, but surprisingly, they could not. The weapons withstood any damage done to them, leading many to believe that the Jarl Gudmundr truly was a legendary warrior chosen by the gods. In this season, we tell of his great strength and his legend as his memory is honored in the Viking tradition.
Ours shall be an alliance. The wolf and the dragon. We shall not be stopped. We shall not be bound. A downfall is coming.
And with that, we finally return to the ongoing narrative. Astria has almost fully conquered Heathmoor. One final push will see Ashfeld fall to her might, and thus all of Heathmoor will be hers. However, she knows it's a gamble. She's stretched her forces thin, and though she hadn't let it show, she was feeling the losses of recent incidents. The arrival of the Varangians, the Aphira, and the Ocelot, all biting at her heels. She needed an ally of her own now, someone to help buffer her new foes while she finished her plans. And that ally arrived conveniently in the form of a message from General Zhe, an ambitious Zhan Hu of the Wulin. Astria had heard of Zhe, a powerful but cunning snake who had a goal to unify the Wulin once more with him as its emperor. In exchange for allowing him to rule the Wulin, he would offer their complete support to her cause, and as a sign of his loyalty, he invited her to join him for a ceremony at the Ashfeld Harbor to receive his prized weapon, the Starfall Sword. Now Astria didn't trust him, but she couldn't deny it was a wonderful opportunity. The Wulin were mighty if united, and they could certainly do great things to help hold off these new enemies of hers. So she arrived at the location with her forces to receive her gift. but Zhe indeed had made an alliance beforehand. Little did Astria know that Zhe had opened the gates of Chang Pass for their once hated foe, the Hatuns. Guljin, their leader, had a dream to unify the world into her khanate and bring a true, lasting peace by ending all war in Heathmoor. To do this, Astria needed to be defeated. Horkos was caught unaware by the sudden attack and the ruthlessness of the Hatuns, and Astria, at long last, was defeated. Guljin is now free to begin her invasion of Heathmoor and capitulate it to her banner and kill those who resist. General Zhe would be given his Wulin in exchange for his help, so long as the Wulin remained subservient. And with the status quo of For Honor completely changed, Year 8, the current year, comes to an end. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this is where the lore has left us, and only Year 9 will tell us where it goes from here.